You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 95, we will be discussing the latest news to hit the Overwatch League. We will share our thoughts on what transpired in the play-in tournament, and of course, we will look ahead to the first week of the Overwatch League playoffs. But before we can do that and introduce you to my co-host, let me just quickly take a moment to thank everyone who is joining us tonight on Twitch for our live show, and of course to thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So joining me tonight, as always, is my co-host Spider. And Spider, I mean, it feels like just a couple of days ago we were talking about our play-in primer. We were right in some regards and completely wrong in others. It was a pretty crazy week, and I'm happy to say everything didn't pan out exactly how we expected it to. We did have a couple of surprises, but a couple of, like, switches between, like, who was going to be playing the Sigma, whether it was a main tank or off tank. We had the Charge come out swinging, only to get, kind of, like, almost dumpstered by the Dynasty. All of that and so much more, but how have the past couple of days been treating you?
I mean, it feels like I just talked to you about Overwatch, and here we are again. So I've been doing pretty good. Like, I enjoyed the play-ins. I enjoyed the polarizing effects that Sigma has had on the community. I have not enjoyed the fact that it basically fundamentally changed what I wanted to put in our Sigma deep dive video. So I had to shift focus, and I need to get some new footage for that. So we pushed that back to probably Wednesday. I'm aiming for Wednesday. Luckily, to coincide with that, or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, they also pushed the competitive season back because it seems to have not taken previous MMR into account. So pro players were placing in gold. And for once, I can say I am a better diva than Choi Hoban.
But I thought everyone wanted an MMR reset, and then they complained that all these top 500 players were matching with silvers or placing in gold.
I know, it's totally like, oh, you want an MMR reset? Yeah, we want an MMR reset. Okay, reset the MMR. Shocked Pikachu face.
Mm-hmm.
Basically like, oh, crap. Now I have to play against good players until they're not in my rank anymore. So that's I'm sure you guys will have fun on Wednesday talking about that, because I'm sure we'll have more information on when they're actually going to start the season, because I'd imagine it'd probably be like later in the week, like Thursday, Friday. But in terms of like the play-ins, like, holy cow, we got maybe one of the best games of the year out of pretty much, the third match in the playoffs. So it can only, my expectations are already high. But I think the key thing I want to take away out of this weekend is I got my wish. I mean, Philly's not going to play in Philly. So I'll take that for what it is. But what about you? How has this weekend, treated you? I know you've been pretty busy, so.
Yeah, I mean, Saturday, like, really this weekend, I had a ton of family stuff going on. So I got to see a majority of the Friday stuff. Except for, like, the second half of the Dragon's Fusion. So then, like, today I basically spent my afternoon, into the early evening, trying to play catch-up. So, like, the biggest thing for me is like, trying to avoid spoilers, which can work in some regards and not in others. In Overwatch League, it was harder to do as opposed to, say, like, any of the Tier 2 stuff that's going on. But I have to say, like, I feel like we hit the head on, like, hit the nail on the coffin in regards to, like, how the Fusion performed. Obviously we'll talk about how they did, but you could tell, like, this is a very stubborn team, and you could honestly didn't really adjust to the meta outside of just be like, oh, we're gonna run Sigma, and then they're not gonna change anything else, and then not try to counter at all. But I really enjoyed the games. The Dragons matches, in both regards, were better than I was anticipating. Even if the Fusion didn't win to set up that lackluster match that I thought would have happened, we ended up getting an even better match. But man, I feel for that Call and Do Panthera squad, and I'll get into that because that's not the first time something's gone down in that exact direction for that team, especially on the map. That was Ilios in map 8 of all things. But let's go ahead and jump into the news. So first off, we do have a new sponsorship for the Overwatch League. They have turned to the Kellogg Company as a new partner with a new multi-year deal which will go through 2021. Now, we've already seen the start of the marketing with this in regards to the Overwatch League play-ins. And, you know, it's being sponsored by Kellogg's Pringles as well as the Cheez-It Grooves. Now, those brands are going to be sponsoring the halftime shows and highlight segments throughout the playoffs. And then, starting in 2020, we'll start to see, like, the Overwatch League branding on the actual, like, snack mixes, things like that. And I know they're also going to be doing a sweepstakes. I don't know if it's ongoing yet, but they're going to do a sweepstakes in regards to the US in order to win tickets to the Overwatch League Grand Finals. Now, it's important to note, like, with this is not Pringles' like, first foray into an esports sponsorship. I know they have something going on with League of Legends right now for the LEC Summer Finals. And we've seen Overwatch partner with Kellogg already, because, you know, obviously they have the cereal, and I know they had some other stuff along with that, but, you know, it seems time and time again, like, if we keep getting these bigger name sponsors, and at least this one is something that we've already had in-house, so it's nice to see that they actually went and expanded upon an existing relationship already at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a foregone conclusion, just because, like you said, there's been almost this co-branding deal for a while between Overwatch and Kellogg's. I mean, they put out, like, initially I think they put out like Overwatch, not really themed, but Overwatch packaging on certain things, and you could get like a free loot box if you bought like a box of, you know, Pop-Tarts, or there was some of that with like the boxes of chips and stuff like that, like the ones with like the mini lunch bags that we buy, like to put in kids' lunches and stuff like that. So this isn't that surprising. I am curious to see where they go from here with it, just because, like, are they gonna have like buy your Boston Uprising Dorado flavor and stuff like that? Like, I wonder how like far they're gonna take this beyond maybe just slapping like Overwatch League on a bag or something like that. So because it seems like, you know, because they made the cereal, it seems like they're a little more invested. So they may actually put out like, you know, a Junkrat's super spicy Cheeto or something like that. So it's cool, and you know, the same old song and dance of more sponsorships means more money coming into the league, which means more success down the line. So I'm all for it. So more good news coming into the off season.
And I can guarantee it'll be a lot easier to find this as opposed to Lucio's, which were very hard to find over by me, and I know a lot of people are having issues with that. But I know, like, even with the Kellogg's promotion in the past, like, you could also mail in to get, like, character posters for Overwatch as well. So we'll see whether or not they're going to continue that trend with the Cheez-Its and the Pringles moving forward as well. So outside of that, you know, we are in the middle of the award season, and we did have the Role Stars being announced for the Overwatch League for this year. So just as a reminder, the league had invited all of the general managers, head coaches, the broadcast talent, as well as select media members in order to vote for 4 players per role who were eligible using the new player impact rating system. So basically, we got 4 for each role, and then I also listed 4 honorable mentions. So starting with the damage role stars, they selected Corey from the Washington Justice, Dean from Shanghai Dragons, Hoxel from Vancouver Titans, and Sinatra from the San Francisco Shock, with their honorable mentions being DM Shanghai Dragons, Airster Atlanta Reign, Jinmu from the Train Hunters, and Rascal from the San Francisco Shock. Now, looking at this, I really feel like there's one that everyone's kind of a little bit more eyebrow raising than others, and that's Corey, seeing as he's only recently started to play DPS as opposed to Jinmu, who had been playing DPS throughout the season. But even on the other roles that we saw, Corey, he did not have the same impact as, say, Hoxel or Sinatra whenever they were playing, Brigitte or Zarya in the case for Sinatra.
Yeah, I mean, Corey is the odd one out, but you can't deny that the impact he had on stage 4, I think, was enough to propel him forward. I mean, he wasn't good stages 1 through 3, but really most of the DPS players weren't playing DPS or damage as they classify it. So
outside of Jinmu.
Right, outside of Jinmu, basically. So it's weird that Jinmu's not on here. Same thing with the, you could have made a case for like Happy because he played a little bit here and there, but I'm not that hung up. Like, I saw a lot of people get really mad that Corey was on here because he only put out a stage 4 performance, but that's when we got to actually see damage. Maybe a little bit in stage 3, but he basically carried Washington to a lot of those wins between him and Stratus. So I'm not gonna fault them for rating him that highly. And obviously, because this was voted in the league, the people that were playing against him were definitely like, yes, he is making a difference and he's going to be a threat going forward now that he can actually play damage. So I'm not that hung up on it. I mean, honestly, the one that I was surprised wasn't on here was Rascal. Like, come on, man. You could put him in damage or support, and he didn't make it in either because he was like a force all season, like whether it was on the Baptiste or, later on the damage role. I think Rascal should have been on here. Like, I honestly probably would have taken Sinatra off just because of the fact that he didn't play a whole lot of damage outside of Zarya. Like, we saw him here and there on stage 4 on Tracer, but I would say he's more of a long shot than Corey. Unless you're weighting it more heavily on a Zarya play. Like, I honestly would have put Rascal on here.
Right on. So moving on to the tank role stars, we have Choi Hyo-bin from the San Francisco Shock, Gushui from the Hangzhou Spark, Mono from New York Excelsior, and then Super, also from the San Francisco Shock. And now looking at the honorable mentions, we have Amen from Train Hunters, Bumper from Vancouver Titans, Fury from London Spitfire, and Janu from Vancouver Titans. So, even an MVP candidate, not enough to get the tank role star, but he is in the honorable mentions. But really, to me, Fury's definitely the biggest standout in regards to the honorable mentions that I was surprised wasn't one of the top 4, just because he has been probably the most consistent, and we even got to see Fury play a different role this past weekend, which was awesome to see, as London were one of 2 teams to kind of like switch main tank and off tank with the introduction of Sigma. But I like the tank ones I'm not too upset about, but Fury was definitely kind of the odd man out, but you cannot deny the impact and a level of consistency that we have seen from the 4 players that were nominated. I mean, even Mono, who, yes, has like rode into easier, division. Granted, they still ended up losing 5 matches throughout the season. He's still kind of been the backbone of the NYXL throughout all of their successes, even dating back to the inaugural season.
The 2 that stand out to me is Sominsu, because I would technically rate him on a tank because we haven't really seen him in a damage role, even though he's technically classified as damage. After Goats went away, we really didn't see him. We saw him like one match maybe, and maybe a map here or there. But the big one to me is Space. Like, where is Space in all this? Like, he was basically behind Choi, the second best diva in the league throughout pretty much the whole season. Maybe Janu, but still, like, he didn't even get an honorable mention, and I feel like he was integral in the Valiant's turnaround. So Space being missing was like, what are you guys doing? But the tank position, even in the honorable mentions, like a lot of the honorable mentions, you could just swap them out and nobody would be mad. So the tank seems, especially since we were dominated by tanks all year, probably the most highly contested. But I just thought it was weird that we didn't see Space on there at all.
Yeah, and you see a ton of Korean players out of that list as well.
And one Chinese player.
Yeah. Imagine that, equaling the U.S. players, with the only one being Super, in that case. But moving on to the support role stars, your role stars for this year, we have IDK from the Hanzhou Spark, Kariv, LA Valiant, Moth from the San Francisco Shock, and then Twilight from the Vancouver Titans, with their honorable mentions being last year's MVP, Jonak, NYXL, Shu from the Guangzhou Charge, Slime from the Vancouver Titans, and Violet from the San Francisco Shock. Now, I will say there's one name on here that I've seen probably cause the biggest uproar out of the lot, and that was Kariv being one of the 4 chosen at this point. I will say Kariv definitely has had some pretty nutty performances on the Ana. That definitely helped propel the Valiant, starting to turn their season around, but unfortunately, we all kind of saw how that played out with Valiant failing to, secure that spot in the play-in. But, Jonak falling off just shows you how deep the support role has been this year with the influx of talent. And, it's worth saying, yeah, his stats are still up there, but he's been surpassed by other Anas and other Zenyatta players in the league this year.
I mean, no Dogman. Where's Dogman? He's probably feeding, but Dogman being absent was a little surprising because I feel like he was part of Reign's, I don't want to say reign, but their ascension to a playoff caliber team through their funk. But I wasn't surprised by Kariv. I saw the uproar about that too, and I saw people talking about it. But Kariv has, consistently been very good, and when he's not good, he's great. The bar for a bad game for Kariv is still very high. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of other problems around. Obviously in stage 1, you can't really fault any problems of Kariv because clearly they had a coaching issue at that point. Big brain Custis didn't make it in. So and after that, the Valiant slowly turned themselves around, and Kariv was a big part of that. I would contribute, Kariv probably more. I made a case for Space, but I would contribute Kariv a little more to that, just because their support play, they stopped, when Goats was in full swing. Support play was very important because your supports could easily be a liability. That was the problem with Goats is you teetered that line between being in position as Lucio and Ana or whoever you were playing at that point, and being basically useless. So, and Kariv did that pretty well. And then as the season got on, he got very good at it. And then we got to see, in stage 4, we got to see them open it up a little bit more. And Kariv looked phenomenal on the Ana. So I would give it to him. Maybe you could make a case for Violet a little more than Kariv, but it goes back to our earlier discussion of how heavily do you want to weight the MVPs into this, mm-hmm. because I feel like the MVPs should almost be exempt because they're in the running for the most valuable player. So of course they're gonna be a role star. Nobody's gonna be except for maybe Rascal because he can fall under multiple categories, or maybe Hydration. We'll see how that plays out for play. But I think MVPs should be exempt, and I think that would open up these lists for a little more, I don't want to say more deserving, but deserving players that weren't nominated for MVP. But yeah, I think the support list was probably the one I was most happy with because I was like, yep, he's good. So I can't think of anybody really more deserving.
Mm-hmm. And moving on, we also had the Dennis Havelka Award that was given to Custis for this year. So that was a pretty emotional moment. Like, you could definitely tell both. I know, like, Mickey was definitely having some issues speaking, like, during the segment. I mean, it's very heavy-hearted with everything, the reason behind the award in the first place. And, Custa, he's been the Valiant captain and their main support player. Now, granted, he wasn't always a starting support this year, and, kind of during the time when he was benched, he still had a strong presence on this team. And, the Valiant season, they went from 0-7 to just missing qualifying for the play-in tournament. And, there was a point where Custa got benched and he started to turn to, starting to do streams. That's when we started to see the Custa News Network pop up. He also was doing charity campaign work during Valiant Plays for St. Jude, which would help benefit childhood cancer research, where he raised over $6,000, both, through stream subs and jersey auctions that he's done for St. Jude Children's Hospital. And I know, like, they had a really good quote from Custa that I want to read really quick, and we can kind of, like, talk about the segment, or, like, even some of the things that, like, his teammates or coaches were saying. Custa says that, "A year ago, I would have said I wanted to be remembered as one of the best in the league, or someone that really had an impact competitively. But I think these days I just want to be someone who had an impact, someone who did something for Overwatch that ends..." I lost my train of thought here. Someone who did something for Overwatch that made it better. That's all I'm trying to do every day. Try to be better myself and try to apply that and make everything better in the long run for everyone. So obviously, Internet Hulk had a huge impact on everyone. He was a reason that Mickey was brought into the Overwatch League, and he definitely pushed a lot of people that was close to him, Custa being one of them as well. And I know, like, a lot of people this year were, like, kind of thinking it might have been Gamsu, but, like, with an award like this, I don't think you can really argue that someone doesn't deserve it just because of the whole reason behind it. But Custa's always been the focal point of the LA Valiant. He's always the first one you see when it comes to this team. He's in all of the promotional stuff. And, he's been a big inspiration for everyone on that team, including a lot of the younger players. Like, I know Space is the youngest one on that team, and he greatly looks up to Custa.
No, I think Custis a very deserving recipient of this. I mean, if you go back to last year when he was on the Fuel, when they traded him off the Fuel, a lot of the Fuel players, like, much to the dismay of the organization, went out and were like, we don't know why we traded him. He was the backbone of the team. Like, he was like the, as positive of a force that Mickey was, it seemed like Custa was like the in-game, like, picker-upper, and the guy behind the scenes, patting you on the back, being like, all right, we'll do better next time, whereas Mickey's the one, like, over there goofing off and, trying to just make everybody smile. And it seems like he carried that through to the Valiant, and, you went through a lot of the stuff that he's done this year, and I think that all makes a very good case for it. I mean, when he got subbed out because of his big brain, he used that big brain to make a positive impact on the community. Like, we got to see him play in you can go back to, like, when Moira released. You can go back, like, when Baptiste released. He was all doing, like, pro pugs and stuff, making jokes, like theory crafting and stuff like that. And then on his streams, he does the same thing. Like, he screws around. And he just makes, like, a positive impact in the community. And if that wasn't enough, like, all the charity work, all the the stuff that his teammates said, like coaches said, how positive an impact is, that he delivers beer to people. I mean, come on, how could you turn that down? I mean, that alone is such a nice thing to do, especially in the LA area. Like, if you don't know the LA area, that place is a pain in the ass to get around. So I think he's very deserving of this. Like, you can make the case for other people, but like you said, you can't say, like, he doesn't deserve it, because he clearly does. He's done so much for the league, so much for his team, and so much for just individual players. Like, even if you see other players talk about him, because a lot of people were tweeting out and a lot of pro players were like, yeah, go Custa and stuff like that. He has a very good relationship with most other players, and that speaks to me. Like, clearly he is a genuine guy. Like the one you see during Custis News Network is the guy that he is behind the scenes. Like he's like, oh, you hate to see it and stuff like that. So, good for him. And it was very emotional, and you could tell like Mickey, if he is transitioning to an interviewer next year, as we've joked, has a little bit of learning and greenness to get rid of. But I thought it was a well put together little segment. I really liked Mickey being there to transition the award. Like I hope they continue that. Like Custis there next year to hand it off to the next person, and I really enjoyed that. So I think it was handled a little better than Roll Stars, where they were just like, here they are, good luck. So
yeah, you would think with Mickey having all that stage time after that one lengthy pause that he would have been more comfortable on stage. Not the case.
Well, he didn't have to talk during that. He got to watch.
True.
He got to watch Bren and Corey shoot Nerf arrows at each other while he acted crazy. So, forming whole sentences wasn't in that repertoire.
This is true. Well, I do know that some teams were probably wishing that they added more stuff to their repertoire in the play-in tournament, because some teams definitely struggled a little bit more than others. So to start off, we had a Pacific showdown between the Guangzhou Charge and the Chengdu Hunters. And the Charge ended up taking this one 4-1 to set up a match against the Seoul Dynasty in the play-in semifinals. Now, the Charge had jumped to an early 2-0 lead by picking up wins on both Ilios and Eichenwald. And the Hunters' sole win came on Assault, when they had a better time bank attack on Horizon Lunar Colony. But of course, Charge do what they do. They were on King of the Hill. They completely dominated Late Shane Tower, shut in the Hunters out 100-0 in both rounds. And, there was a lot of talk going into the play-in tournament about how Chengdu was performing in scrims. The scrim bucks were at a high. People were saying, like, this could be a top 4 team, and sure enough, they did not cash in enough while they had the opportunity to, and a lot of that comes down to the Pharah and Doomfist play that we saw between Nero and Eileen. Eileen was unleashed in this series. So, Nero completely dominated in the skies on Pharah, and, we've always kind of talked about how Jinmu has not been as impactful in the current meta, or the 2-2-2 meta, as opposed to what he was when he was facing Goats, when he doesn't have as much opposition. He really only had to deal with, like, a Diva maybe flying up to try to deal with him, or maybe a Zenyatta or whatever. Not anymore. But Nero was just landing consecutive, like, direct rocket hits in the air on Jinmu, and Jinmu just did not have an answer. A lot of times he was getting zoned out by the pressure from Nero, and that definitely opened up a lot of opportunities on the ground for Eileen. Eileen was getting in, securing a kill, backing out, and there was really nothing the Hunters' backline could do. They were so susceptible to the Doomfist, and that was something that we saw a lot throughout the play-in tournament, and probably something we're going to see a lot of going into the postseason. Now, it was pretty obvious, like, in regards to, like, the DPS duo, this was just a case of being outclassed. And, we saw Yun Zhao Lon bring out the Sombra a little bit in this series to try to deal with the Doomfist. The EMP usage, typical YXL performance, quite a few blunders in that regard. Not really getting too much value out of there. We even saw a little bit of Symmetra play, which, you and I kind of thought, well, maybe there's going to be something here. No, that did not work. Symmetra, outside of, like, quickly getting on an assault point, did not have good value in the play-in tournament. Turns out, Doomfist just doesn't care. He gets in, gets out, secures kills, and Symmetra just does not have the survivability comparatively. And of course, our first good look at Sigma came in the form of Hotba, and I can't say I'm too surprised. He's really been one of the most flexing tanks that we have seen, whether it's going to DPS, when he was on the Fusion, getting to play Tracer in the playoffs and having a pretty miraculous run with them. Now we've seen him dominate another off-tank roles, and now Sigma. But all in all, this was a pretty one-sided affair for the Charge.
Yeah, I mean, going into this, we didn't know Doomfist was going to be as prevalent as he was. We knew he would be very popular because he is one of the core counters to Sigma, and he does well against Symmetra because we thought Symmetra would be played a little more. But you had to think that, the Charge would do well if they do get to play Doomfist, because Eileen was always pretty well known as one of the best Doomfists in the world, and Nero can pretty much flex onto whatever supplements that we saw a lot of Pharah here, but we've seen the May in the past, and we've seen Reaper and multiple different looks. We didn't see a whole lot of Happy, which was initially surprising because that was the duo we saw in stage 4, but as soon as we saw that it was mostly Doomfist related, it made a lot of sense. To the Hunters' credit, they did play around Yang Zhelong's switches and stuff pretty well. The problem was they just weren't isolating targets and killing them off fast enough. They had the right game plan, they just didn't have the execution down, which I think, come the next game, if there was a certain counter that, maybe there's a character in the game that counters both Pharah and Doomfist, maybe Soul might know who that is. They could have made it, made a different story out of this game. But yeah, I mean, our first look at Sigma, it was pretty awesome that our first look at Sigma came at the hands of Hotba, because I mean, he is arguably one of the most flexible players in the league, and he looked really good on it. And Rio was still, Rio landing, halts where he needed to, and syncing up with Hotba very well. The one thing that really stood out to me in this game, actually both the Charge games, is Rio and Hotba's halt rock combos were like super on point. Pretty much better than most of the other teams. Like I'd probably say London's was a little better, or at least a little more consistent.
Which is weird, since Fury was the one on Orisa in this case.
Right, that's something maybe we could talk about as we see a little more of it, because I want to see how many teams do that, like switch the main tank to Sigma and the off tank to Orisa. Like maybe we've been wrong this whole time. Maybe Sigma is a main tank and Orisa's just been a really, really good off tank this whole time. Like who knew? But to like close this game out, like you said, it was fairly one-sided. Like we thought the upset potential for the Hunters might have been there, but you're going to hear this a lot tonight, because as we talk about the future games, we don't know really shit about this meta. Like we have 4 games under our belt for 4 very different teams, 2 teams that traditionally don't run the meta, and they're out now, unfortunately. But we'll see where it goes. So it's very, very exciting. But Eileen was a force in this match, and you're gonna see like a running theme as we talk through these matches. Like basically, the better Doomfist pretty much wins. We had some discussion about Sigma carry potential, and I think that's there. But the pick potential of Doomfist is just too strong right now.
Well, even if you have a good Sigma, that does not mean it will result in a win. Now, Poco on Sigma looked pretty good. I don't think... It's hard to say, like, comparing it to, like, Hotba, because both of them had their own moments, but it was definitely up there. But unfortunately for the Fusion, they were not able to overtake the Dragons in this series. This one went 6 games with the Dragons securing the win, 4-2. So I had the right map score. Wrong team winning, but I got the last one completely right with the 4-1, so I'll take it where I can get it. So for the Fusion, this was something that I brought up earlier. It's really hard not to see the Fusion as a stubborn team, because the only thing that they added to their repertoire going into the play-ins was the Sigma. So they relied a lot on EQO over on the May, and Carpe on his not carry hero on the Reaper. And oh my goodness, this was It was a better match than I was expecting, but man, it was kind of a hard series to sit through because the Fusion are able to flex off, but they just opted not to, and it was so infuriating to watch. And what was crazy about this is the Fusion, they just started to revel after losing 2 maps, despite having time-bake advantages. In 3 separate maps, they lost 2 of them, and a third one resulted in the draw. And when you're not winning games like that, you just know it's not going to go in your way, and it was just so deflated. Like, the Fusion could have won this series, just based off of the advantages that they had, but Philly had the most Philly series that you could possibly imagine, and there were some moments that really make you shake your head. So, Sado, he would, keep bringing out the Winston in this current meta, and I will say, like, even going back to, like, the Hunters, like, they would start out good running the Sigma, and then whenever they would, like, lose control, they would switch to Dive. Granted, that didn't always work for them, but, the Fusion just seemed to just be stuck in this mindset of, okay, we're just going to stick to the Mei, we're going to stick to the Reaper. I know there was a point when they were on Mecha Base, and, Dragons were running the McCree on the high ground, and the Fusion were trying to poke them from the high ground against something with ranged, rather than actually trying to rotate on the point, which is something that the Dragons' next opponent actually did, which ended up winning the game on that map. But it was so frustrating to see, okay, we're going to have a standoff on the high ground, but we can't really do any damage. And lo and behold, they end up just completely crapping the bed in that moment. I hate to see something like that, especially when, in this series, we got to see Carpe on McCree on Dorado, but they didn't stick to that game plan, even though it could have been to their advantage. So, you hate to see it, but we have no home team in the finals again this year.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it, but Poco Sigma was almost the whole reason that they were in this game as much as they were. Like, he was solo carrying certain points, like going in and getting 2-3 kills, gravitic flexing and taking people off the point and then securing a kill or 2 and setting up, the Reaper Mei, which they, like you said, they stuck with. But they didn't, and this goes back to the last match, they didn't contain Youngjin. Youngjin's Doomfist just ran wild in their backline. Like, Poco tried for a little bit. Like, if you watch the first 2 games, like, he was definitely, like, fielding the backline, like, trying to save them from the Doomfist. And then you could tell, like, he just gave up and started going more offensive, because that's when we saw, like, the wild flanks and stuff. And to Poco's credit, they actually worked out here and there. And Sigma flanks became kind of a on-running theme as this weekend went on. We got to see more and more.
Marvel did it best, though.
But Marvel pulled it off the best, for sure. But I'm glad you brought up Dorado, because Dorado, like, the McCree switch was good. The problem was EQO also switched to Pharah to deal with Ding on Pharah, and EQO just got bodied on Pharah. And if you watch this meta, like, where your Pharah positions is so important, because it's basically like Widowmaker. You got to think of Pharah in this meta like Widowmaker. Like, she controls the sightlines, she controls the space, and if you don't have that space to work with, that makes your McCree basically next to useless, because he can't get sightlines on the other enemy Pharah. Or if you're running an Ana, the same thing, because that's basically later on in the weekend, to counter the Pharah Doomfist, we saw basically McCree Ana bully out the Pharah and then create room for the counter Doomfist. And that's how Philly lost this one. Is EQO just got destroyed by Ding. Like, they're normally we can make a contest to be like, EQO is a really good flex player, and he does all this stuff. He got destroyed on Pharah. Like, go back and watch the Pharah v Pharah between these two, because it's not even close. And that's what lost Philly this map. Like, Carpe just couldn't do anything on McCree because he couldn't get anywhere without being vastly out of position. So, well done for the Dragons for subbing in Ding and allowing him to just run wild on a very Pharah dependent map. And EQO needed to step it up, and that's where they faltered. And it's kind of funny that this season they falter where last season is what got them to the finals. Is basically their DPS crapped the bed, or poo-pooed themselves to sleep, as we've heard desk people say. And it's sad because we really expected more out of Philly. They didn't make any changes, but now they're going to have to go into the offseason and probably take a good long look at their tank line, take a good look at their DPS and how the team is run. Like, this is going to be a very different offseason for Philly than was last year. And this game is going to be something that they go back to I would hope pretty heavily, because this basically was Philadelphia's season in a nutshell. Like, we don't want to bend, so we're gonna lose. Like, that was it. So I will probably say Poco was the most impressive Sigma throughout the week, like solo Sigma throughout the week. Whereas Marvel was I'd probably say you could make a case for Marvel and Gesture as the best Sigmas overall, but they had a lot of good support too. So I would probably give the nod to Poco, because he had the standout performance for me for the week. And for somebody who talked so much shit and hating the meta, man, he just hit the ground running. He's like, I hate this, so I'm gonna destroy it. So but it was a good game. Like, we kind of went into it with low expectations and were pleasantly surprised.
But yeah, I definitely felt for Philly, though, just not being able to capitalize with the time bank advantage. And, like, as soon as it happened the second time, you knew at that point it was a done deal moving forward. So with that set up a match between the London Spitfire and the Shanghai Dragons, which was definitely the match of the week. This would have went 8 maps on Saturday. This was the only Overwatch League series to go 8 maps, and, for the Dragons, for that Kondu Panthera core, that was a familiar setting for them, as, they were in this marathon of a series, just like they were in Apex when they ran up against Runaway in the finals, both of which resulted in defeat on Ilios. That is a cursed map for them, but even the Spitfire, who have not been a good control team, managed to come back in the series. And, this was one of 2 instances where we saw the off-tank picking up Orisa in favor of the main tank playing Sigma. So you had Fury, who moved over to Orisa. Gesture was on the Sigma for the Spitfire. And, looking at Shanghai this weekend, they played 15 maps in around 19 hours over the weekend. That's crazy. Really, the only other time it really happened was in the inaugural season with the Spitfire. I think they ended up playing, it was like 14 maps in a day or something like that. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty. Yeah, that first stage 1 playoffs where they played in the morning and then played in the evening.
But if you want just an image of how this series went, just look at Bedosian after the end of the series. He was literally shaken on stage because it was that intense of a series. And I have to shout out Wolf and Achilleos, who were on commentary for this. They were also part of that, Runaway versus Kondu Panthera Apex Finals, but they did not waver energy-wise throughout this series. Like, they were the perfect duo to have in this sort of situations. And, for the Dragons, there were definitely a couple of moments where they could not escape the Shane 9 in this series, which was unfortunate. But to the Dragons' credit, they were able to fight their way back in order to force Ilios. And, it's crazy, like, the Dragons looked like they were in control. They were up 99-0 on Ruins, and then the Spitfire come back and just run it back. It was so heartbreaking. And then, you had moments from, like, Prophet, who brought out the Tracer in clutch moments on, like, Hanamura, completely decimating the Dragons' backline, which was great to see. Like, we wait for moments like this, and it really felt like in this series, you could feel the Spitfire leveling up in the playoffs, similar to what we saw last season. Now, that being said, there were a couple of times where, they were getting outmatched when it comes to the DPS, but across the board, London really handled the Doomfist well in this series, but they had issues dealing with Pharah. So that is definitely something that could be exposed moving forward when we get into the postseason. But I feel like across the board, probably the most telling thing for me when we're looking at the Dragon side of things was Coma. Coma definitely had quite a few instances when he would go for an ill-timed resurrect, and it would end up getting picked off, and it would just turn the tides of that team fight. And despite, Dean kind of like leveling up as the series had progressed, I like seeing the Dragons bring it back after they kind of like got stomped in the first two maps. But, these are the matches that we want to see. Like, I know we were kind of like down on the Dragons because like they had a lot of struggles in Stage 4. This was a team that had a rough go of it in 2-2-2. They weren't having as many angles to work with. And then we have Pharah Doomfist, and now we have, the ground battle and then the air battle, and now suddenly this team is looking a lot stronger. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to beat London in this case.
Yeah, I mean, this was a grueling game of 8 maps. In London, you could tell kind of had been there before, so they, even though the KDP group had been there before, London had done it on the stage. So you could tell like as the game went on. I think both teams handled it very well, but I think you could tell at the end London's nerves were still a little bit more intact. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the first 2 maps were like super one-sided. Like we were like, oh crap, this is old Shanghai. They didn't capture zero. Like they captured 0 map objectives during the first 2 maps. So like it's not even really worth talking about it. Like at that point, basically London was firing on all cylinders, and they countered the Pharah and the Doomfist very well. The turnaround was Hanamura. Like Hanamura, Dragons had a decent point A, and then they stalled out on point B. And for a team that gets to go second, when a team stalls out on point B, that's like a huge win condition, because that's a huge motivating factor. Because as hard as point B can be on Hanamura, most teams in the Overwatch League can take it at least once, just through sheer force of will. But to the Dragons' credit, like they didn't even let it get that far. Like they full held the Spitfire, and that was mostly off of London just not knowing what to do to get through the door. Like we saw them initially run like the Arista Sigma, and then they went like full dive, and that didn't work because you're trying to dive into Doomfist Pharah, and sure you could dive the backline. Unfortunately, when you dive the backline, there's 2 highly mobile DPS characters that can be pretty much anywhere and take you out, or just destroy your own backline at that point, which is exactly what the Dragons did. So good on them for recognizing a weakness and throwing a wrench into London's plan. And then we went into Watchpoint Gibraltar, and Gibraltar, the Dragons could have easily won. Like they had the full advantage going into the overtime push, where London had to push it basically to point B to win the map, and Dragons went into a fight halfway through Hangar with most of their ultimates. They tried to pull the whole Sig 9 where he lifts them off the cart and stuff like that. That doesn't work, and they squander all their ultimates. Like that was a huge misplay by Shanghai. Really nothing London did on Watchpoint Gibraltar was standout. Like it was okay. Like Shanghai did okay, but Shanghai really, like, that was definitely Shanghai losing a map rather than London winning a map. And then Li Zhang, Shanghai, do typically pretty well on Li Zhang. The Pharah Doomfist, put London into the ground, and then from there we go to King's Row, right? And King's Row is like the one I want to focus on the most, because King's Row is the one that everybody is talking about. So King's Row came down to a few things, and it's mostly going to come down to Ding versus Prophet in the air. And I thought this was so funny because people were like, "Oh, Prophet's so good, Prophet's so good." Prophet made exactly 3 plays on King's Row that won them the map. Like, that's literally what he did the whole map. Like, other than that, it was Ding just destroying him. So Prophet basically only won the air battle when he had nano boost, or there was one instance where Ding had to position in a weird spot because it was the end of the round, where Prophet, actually took over him. But Prophet basically, when he needed to, would step up and just go like Super Saiyan, and then he would like fade to obscurity the rest of the map. And the other problem with that is his partner in crime, Birdring, was actively throwing the map. Like, I am glad, because I've been waiting for the replays to go up. Go watch Birdring's POV during the second defense, where London actually, holds, to draw, Shanghai's second attack. Because Birdring actively flanks multiple times through Hotel, and the first time it works out okay because they're like, "Oh crap, there's a McCree here. What the heck?" And he like gets a flashbang off of Faro, which should never happen, and it deletes it. The second time, Birdring gets destroyed because he tries the same thing, and Sigma just turns around and destroys him. So they could have easily won that map. And then you mentioned the Shang 9 where nobody touched the point. I was actually watching Sideshow stream, and I want to go back and look at it in the replay viewer, but he broke down like that last second where Gamsu died and Envy flies off in pure Envy fashion, as he is known to do on Diva. Even if somebody touched the point for Shanghai, it wasn't really looking good for them. Like, they were about to pull off a pincer on the back line. They really didn't have any bodies on the point. Like, Envy had already used his boosters. He was at like a quarter health in his mech. Like, it's possible. Like, I don't want to say anything's impossible because their DPS are very nutty at times, but it's not as big of a deal as people make it. It's not like the old when Envy flew off the cart during Watchpoint Gibraltar, when they were back in the day. So it's not that big of a deal.
Or Young Jin on Dorado.
Or Young Jin on Dorado against the Fuel. Like, it's definitely not as clear cut. Like, I would consider it basically a London draw either way, unless something really nutty happens for Shanghai. And then the rest of the maps are basically just who can outlast the other team. And like you said, the last map was Shanghai's to win, because they knew it was London's worst map. They knew they typically have advantage on control maps in general, not just against the Spitfire. But Spitfire, to their credit, have always been like a crazy overtime team. Like, whenever overtime ticks over, like, they just, I don't know, it's like Prophet and Gesture just say, okay, we don't want to lose this. And then, like, they just go nuts. And that's basically what happened here. And then, they eventually run that round back. And then we go into round 3. And you can tell just Dragons are like brain dead at that point, because there were multiple calls by the Dragons to just draw out a fight and extend a fight. Which shouldn't have happened, because Dragons didn't have the point. Like, there was essentially like 3 fights in the third map, which shouldn't happen when you don't have the point. Like, as soon as you lose 1, maybe especially 2, but you need to just get the fuck out of there and try again. Whereas Dragons were like, no, we're gonna fight this out, we're gonna win it, and they never did. So good for London for sticking it out, but holy cow, this whole game, we got to see various flexing from both sides. Like, we actually got to see London force Ding off of the Pharah at certain points. We saw Young Jin get forced off of the Doomfist, which, good for him for actually trying something else, because as the game we're going to talk about next, if you're getting hard countered as Doomfist and not doing anything, you need to switch or you're going to lose the game. So this was a great match. Like, like I said, I'm working on our Sigma video. There's a lot from this match that I'm going to pull for our Sigma video. But the all around play from basically everybody was nuts. Like Izayaki made a case for himself in this match. Like his sleeps would turn fights. Like it was insane the stuff he was doing. So I'm glad to see the Dragons showed up. I am sad that their run ended here. Just because them winning season 2 of Overwatch League would have been like a phenomenal story. Like
I mean, even knocking out London would have been a phenomenal story, going from an 0-40 team to knocking out last season's champs.
So I am sad that we lose out on that, but at least they didn't go out like they looked like they were going to after the first 2 maps. So I can't say I'm disappointed with the outcome, because this is basically what we expected regardless of who made it for this particular match. So I'm happy. Like I'm always happy when we get to see entertaining Overwatch. And as a whole this weekend, we thought going into a double barrier meta would be boring. Like a lot of people were like, oh, this is going to be terrible, this is awful to watch. This was maybe the most exciting weekend we've had so far. Like maybe you could say the Shock Titans game was pretty good, like during stage 2 and maybe stage 1. But this was like this whole weekend was pretty phenomenal.
And one of the crazier things too, it's like kind of like going in knowing it would be double barrier, or like there's no way any team is gonna bring out Widow in this meta. But like there were times when DM would come out on Widow, he would find spots in between the shields to get early pickoffs, but it wasn't something that we saw consistently or that often, just because of how potent like the Doomfist Pharah combo was. But we did get to see more hit scan than what we were expecting outside of the McCree, which was nice to see. But moving on, of course, we had the match between the Seoul Dynasty and the Guangzhou Charge. And China's last hope is going to fall to the Hangzhou Spark in the playoffs, because it was the Dynasty coming out on top, securing a 4-1 win over the Charge. Now, this was a tale of 2 Charge teams. So, they had great success infiltrating the backline in the first round, and then they got completely snuffed out against the Dynasty. And a lot of that boils down to Fleta. You mentioned, like, if only there was a counter to, these 2 heroes that we're seeing, pretty consistently so far in this current meta, the Pharah and the Doomfist. And sure enough, that hero is McCree. And, Fleta, while he did not have a Fleta deadlift because, Fitz was kind of doing his own thing, and, it's no coincidence that Fist has Fitz's name in it, because there's that whole thing too. But it was crazy to see, like, going in, I was like, okay, seeing how much the Charge leveled up and seeing how much their DPS dominated, like, there was always that doubt in my mind. Like, I did not pick the Dynasty to win, but I talked about, like, if the Dynasty go up 2-0, they're going to win the series. And sure enough, Dynasty did come out, they went up 2-0, ended up taking the 4-1 win. But man, what a performance from Marvel to start things off, like, on the Sigma. The flank Sigma, of all things. That King's Row defense with the Doomfist and the Mei was spectacular. Like, the Charge had no answer to that. And you had Marvel just on the side, and Marvel's accretion throughout this series was absolutely absurd. I knew, like, on Busan, he ended up hitting Nero from, like, downtown with the accretion. There were a couple of times when he would cancel out Shu's Coalescence, which was awesome to see. Like, out of all of the Sigmas, I was most impressed with his rock-throwing capabilities. And he was just landing shot after shot when it comes to the longer distance shots out there. Now, Chara kind of fell victim to positioning here, also on the Mercy. Looking for the resurrections here. And, Fleta really forced Nero off with the Pharah thanks to his McCree play. And they didn't really have an answer to that. And, Hotba, he still had a very strong performance on the Sigma, but it seemed like every time he was gonna go for that Gravitic Flux, you would have Toby coming in with the perfectly timed sound barrier to help counter that. And, we thought the Charge had a really good shot at making a deep run. Like, this was going to be one of the dark horse teams outside of Atlanta to really make a run in the playoffs. And the Dynasty, you know, they prove like they belong. You know, for the longest time this season, this has been a team who has just kind of been there. You know, they haven't been, like, wildly spectacular, but they haven't been, like, trash tier. They've just been a level of consistent throughout the season where we haven't seen, like, these huge dips. You know, we haven't seen, like, the valleys or anything like that. So to see them continue to have this run of a performance is a very good sign. But I'm devastated, though, that this means that, you know, Dynasty draw the Titans. My two dads have to fight. And one of them has to get knocked down to the lower bracket.
This was a great game. Like we really didn't expect this level of a game, and we really didn't expect the outcome of this game. But like you said, a lot of it came down to Fleta. And you know, I made the joke earlier. If only there was a character that could counter Doomfist and Pharah at the same time. That's a gross oversimplification. Maybe not when Fleta's playing it, because Fleta's freaking nutty on McCree, but you know, Fleta and Ryu Hong for a large part were controlling the skies and keeping Nero you know, basically either landlocked or way out of position. And like I said, the Pharah positioning is very important for this meta. And Eileen just couldn't do anything. Like as soon as Eileen would go in to do something, Fleta was there to either destroy him or, you know, Ryu Hong's Moira would fade away, because we got to see Ryu Hong play a lot of Moira, which is popular in this meta. Like Moira Lucio is very popular as a support duo. And I do want to like shout out Ryu Hong, like as mechanically gifted as he is, and as like much of a meme hero as Moira tends to be. He definitely shows you how far you can push that character in terms of like skill ceiling. Just because of the fact, like, go watch his POV for a little bit, and just look at his like resource management and like his cooldown usage and everything like that. Like, this guy pushed her to the absolute limit. Like, there was no point that he didn't have what he needed to make the best of a situation. Like, it was crazy what he was able to do on her. So he was, I don't say he was like the deciding factor, but he was definitely a large part of why Marvell was able to pull off a lot of those flanks, because, you know, Marvell could then just, you know, float his way back to the Moira, and Moira could heal him up, kind of thing. So but yeah, I mean, a large part of their success has to be Fleta, because Fleta was landing shots that nobody in their right mind has, you know, any right to hit on McCree. Like, he was hitting, you know, Nero, like as soon as he would pop out of a corner, like Nero would get headshot. At that point, as a Pharah, you're basically like, cool, I'm either dead or I have to go back the way I came, which is back around this building where I can't do anything. So it was surprising that they were able to control it this well. The only thing that makes me worry about the Dynasty a little bit is the Charge's plan was I don't say it was easy to scout out, but once you saw them run it the day before, you kind of knew what to do. And you could tell, like, the Dynasty through scrims had practiced this comp very well, because out of all the McCrees we saw through the week, Dynasty was the best at protecting him. Like, as much of a meme as Marvel's flanks were, he was right there whenever he needed to protect the McCree, whether it was with accretion, whether it was with barrier, you know, stuff like that. So Dynasty, as long as they remain flexible, which I don't think they should have any problem with, can be successful. And, you know, we talked about it at the top of the show, so I do want to touch on it one more time, is Fitz's Doomfist. Like, you had gone into a little bit there. But that surprised me. Like, I didn't know Doomfist was really in his hero pool. And he looked better than pretty much every other Doomfist we saw that weekend. You know, except for maybe Eileen the day before, obviously not in this game. But he was the master at just getting picks and then getting the heck out of there. Like, it was crazy the amount of stuff that he was able to position and get away with. And I don't want to put that on the Charge, because the Charge weren't really in a position to counter it most of the time because he was coming from like all over the place and he would just go in, pop, and destroy. And then he would get super aggressive. As much as he did like the kill and get out, he equally just stayed in. Like he would stick around for a lot longer than some of these other Doomfists. But I, you know, I was very surprised by his Doomfist, and if that's going to be something going forward, I think they're in a good position. It's just they have to, and this is something I'm worried about all teams is they have to know when to switch. Like this Pharah Doomfist is very good, but this game showcased basically how vulnerable it is. Like if you are getting countered, you need to switch. And this is like case study for that. Like as strong as that is right now, it's not like goats. It's not like you just have to beat them with this comp. You have to change. Like sure, you could keep trying it till you beat them with this comp, but that might not necessarily happen. Whereas you're better off trying to make a change. And we saw other changes throughout the weekend work in certain circumstances. Like we harped on dive earlier, but dive can work on certain maps depending on the geometry. Hanamura A is not one of them because it's basically flat and open. But beyond that, like dive works. There are other options that I hope we see going forward. And as we talk about the playoffs to come, I want to preface this now is this is our best guess, guys. Like these were 4 sample games, and it's gonna get nutty. Like honestly, we're gonna see some strange stuff going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's really made me rethink like how the Spitfire and Dynasty are gonna fare in the playoffs. Like, cause obviously our brackets are shot already, but that bracket tool that we linked in the prior weeks does actually update as the playoffs progress. So you guys can re-update your brackets accordingly. But this week we do have the start of the playoffs, and this is gonna be going on throughout September. So this week, this is what's going to happen. We're gonna have the round of 8. We're gonna move on, so we're gonna play the winners between the first couple of matches from Thursday, and then the 2 matches from Friday. Then we'll also have the losers of said matches also happening this week. So we have 2 matches on Thursday, 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and 2 on Sunday. But of course, right now we only know who are playing in the first 4. So on Thursday, we have the Seoul Dynasty going up against the Vancouver Titans. And then we have the LA Gladiators going up against the Hangzhou Spark. And then on Friday, we have London Spitfire going up against the New York Excelsior. And then we have Atlanta Reign versus the San Francisco Shock. Now, Spider, let's talk about the Reign really quick. So the Reign were, like, the first team, well, I don't want to say the first team, but they were really the ones pushing Symmetra experimentation in Stage 4. We've not had good success with Symmetra so far based off of the 4 matches we have seen. So does that make you rethink how the Reign are going to do with the meta shifts that we have seen?
Not really. I think Symmetra can still work, but I think the Reign are smart enough to realize that she has weaknesses, and her big weakness is Doomfist. Like Doomfist just shits on her. Like that's honestly, whenever we saw Symmetra not work, it was because of Doomfist. So if you can play a game where you force the Doomfist off onto something else, switching Symmetra is not a bad idea. Like at that point, you force them to switch to you, and you're at that point you can set yourself up, and they can change to Doomfist again, and then you play this whole back and forth. But I don't think the Reign are like, they're not Philly. The Reign have never been that type of team where they're like, oh, we're only going to run one thing and that's it. That's never been the Reign's MO. Like throughout the different roster changes and stuff, they've always been a very, very flexible team. The problem with this match is the Shock are equally, if not more so, flexible. So I hope the Reign do well because I still would like to see them go far, but I don't think that's a trap we have to worry about. Like we may see a little more Symmetra out of the Reign than maybe some of these other teams, but I think they're smart enough to know when to switch. And I mean, Erster can carry on multiple different heroes. So I'm not super worried about the Reign going into the Shock, other than they're playing the Shock. Like I don't think there's a lot of pitfalls that some of these other teams can fall into that I'm worried about with the Reign. Like I think the Reign will still do fairly well. And you know, the only thing to me that I have a question about the Reign is who's going to play the Sigma, because FRD has been looking very good on the Diva. So we could see him swap to the Sigma and maybe do as well. But Pokepo has been tearing it up too. So, you know, that's my question for the Reign is like who's going to play that. But yeah, I think the Reign are flexible enough that we don't have to worry about them just getting pigeonholed into a composition. And if they do, they're not the Reign that I would have expected.
So, looking at the whole main tank, off tank discussion, when it comes to who's been playing the Sigma, it's primarily been the Korean teams who have decided to like swap out who is playing what. Now with the Titans, it's safe to say like Bumper has definitely had some issues adjusting to Orisa. So when it comes to the Titans, I fully stand by. You know, Bumper switching over to Sigma in this case and having Janu going over to the Orisa in this case. Who knows? Maybe we'll even see Tizzy. Like, we know Tizzy is in LA. So he is with the team, so we'll see whether or not that happens. But, you know, Mono is another one who has, you know, really been the backbone of NYXL. Like, I would not be surprised to see Mono also making the adjustment. So I really have a feeling like we're going to see that sort of mirror when it comes to the tank swaps between Seoul and Vancouver as well as London and New York. But it's so crazy to see just the level of consistency we have seen between the main tank flexibility, but also how well the flex tanks have picked up Orisa and even just managing to land really good halt combinations, even for, you know, a character that maybe they haven't really even practiced outside of, you know, a couple of weeks at this point.
It's almost like Orisa isn't that hard of a character to play as long as you play around your other tank.
Or use your cooldowns correctly.
Well, see, even that's not a big deal in this meta because you don't have a Mei pushing you.
This is true.
Honestly, the biggest part of Orisa's cooldown.
Flux is the other thing. You need to time that right.
And even if you don't, you can still get caught in the flux and then, you know, fortify afterwards and still take, you know, I still think you take the damage, but it still saves you after the fact from follow-up damage. So, it's not like the Orisa cooldown usage is not as big of a deal as it was in stage 4, which is good for Bumper because Bumper was obviously the standout, like bad Orisa of the top tier tanks. Fusions was the other one, but I wouldn't put him on the top tier tank list. So this, you know, you want to talk about Seoul and Titans. The thing that worries me about this game for Seoul is as high as we were on Seoul, Titans have a week to break down what they saw Seoul do, whereas Seoul has no idea what the Titans are going to run because you know these two teams probably haven't scrimmed each other. Like, it would be very odd for playoffs teams to actively scrim each other. You know, give or take, like they may play one set here and there, but it's going to be very like janky, and they're going to clearly hide what they're trying to do. So I'm worried in that instance. You know, the Titans, on the other hand, like we worried about them in stage 4, but there was that whole sandbagging debate. Like, are they really throwing? Are they just not showing their hand? Are they just throwing things against the wall to see how it works because they kind of knew the meta would change? Because if you listen to any of the pro players, I don't think anyone specifically from the Titans said this, but a lot of like the English speaking pro players were basically like, Yeah, the meta during playoffs is going to be completely different. So stage 4, if you're in it, it doesn't matter. Like it's not even good practice at that point. So maybe the Titans run something out. Like we haven't seen any Genji, which I don't think will work well in this meta. I don't think we even have a meta yet, but we did see a lot of that. But I don't know what the Titans are going to run. Like I sat here today. I had today off. If you're not in the U.S. today, it was a holiday. So I was sitting here and in between, screwing around on World of Warcraft, I was like looking at, various comps, various like theory crafting. I even went back and looked at like what these players played in Runaway and like went back and I'm like, holy crap, man! Like the Titans could honestly play almost any configuration they want in almost any amount of players. Like Sominsu is an unknown factor. You still got Stitch. You have Tizzy, which we don't know. So I'm really worried in terms of like scouting potential because the Titans have tape on Soul. Granted, it's only 2 games, or 1 game, right?
One game.
It's 1 game. So it's not that much, but it's at least a start. So I do worry about that. And I think this is a good match to lead off on because we're gonna see some weird variation out of this because as much as Guangzhou's like Doomfist Pharah was like their thing, Titans don't really have their thing. So it's gonna be up to Seoul to adapt to the Titans. So I think this is going to be a really, really good match. I still am giving the edge to the Titans just off of current season pedigree. And they are, like I said, there's so much flexibility in that roster. But I wouldn't be surprised to watch Lunatic High knock Runaway out in a quarterfinals again, because that's happened in the past. This whole playoff structure like is driving me up a wall from an analysis standpoint because I'm like, I don't even know. Like they're gonna play some Overwatch.
Yeah, and the primary reason why I want to see Bumper play in the Sigma is I can't tell you how many times we would see these moments where a team would be winning out the fight, and then you would see the Sigma chasing to get the cleanup kill, and then you would just see like the shield moving forward further and further across the map and just trying to hold it down.
I have to throw this out there though. Sigma's shield travels at the exact same speed as Reinhardt's charge.
This is true.
Can you imagine Bumper with a shield in front of him as he's charging? Like how dangerous he could be? Like that would not surprise me if they try to pull that off at least once. Like just yeah, I don't know. Like it's gonna be a wild weekend.
Yeah, because we did see a little bit of Reinhardt, but it was mostly in like defensive situations to like Salt to like try to get like a pin, at the end. And like I know some people want to like make the argument of like why not just run Reinhardt since like he doesn't really care about the shields per se, but you're losing so much poke damage from the Orisa comparatively, so probably not going to happen. But this is just one of those like old school Korea matches that I'm really excited to see just because it does have Lunatic High versus Runaway, which by the way guys, if you did not pay attention to Korea contenders, Runaway did make the gauntlet, same with Element Mystic and Genji Esports, which is the Seoul Dynasty Academy team. So all of our gauntlet teams are locked in at this point. But of course, we'll be covering that next month when that happens, so that should be pretty exciting. We'll see which Korean team is gonna walk away, or maybe our boys ATL Academy will show up and show out. Who knows? It'd be crazy, but I know a lot of teams are gonna be looking at Sparkle for next season. We'll see who lands him and starts the bidding war. But this is just one of those games where it's just like, I'm not gonna be disappointed in the result either way. Like, I feel like either team could have a good shot at making a run in the lower bracket, but obviously I'm gonna favor the Titans in this series. It's just a matter of how are they, like, what part of the meta are they going to do? Like, are we going to see Pharah Doomfist? Are we going to see the Sombra play? Because, Sombra was something that they had in their wheelhouse. We saw quite a bit of McCree play from the Titans throughout the season. But, they always have Dive in their back pocket, should they choose to do that. But how prominent is that actually going to be when a lot of people are running double barrier? Probably not that well. So, like, I can imagine a situation where, we come out with the Orisa Sigma, things don't go away, and then someone reverts to Dive. And that would be right in Titans wheelhouse, and I don't think someone is going to want to make that mistake against Vancouver. Because that has always been, their bread and butter. But I think the Titans will win this. And, the next match that we have, too, is going to be another interesting one. Because we have the Gladiators versus the Spark. Spark were a team that looked like they were in danger of getting relegated to the play-in tournament. They kind of turned around their stage 4, and then you had the Gladiators, who, you want to talk about flexibility. Like, everyone knows, like, Hydration's been putting in a stupid amount of work on ladder with Sigma. Maybe he'll be the Sigma player, maybe not, but he also plays a lot of Doomfist, so chances are, we might see, Surefour or even Decay getting benched throughout this postseason. That's a very strong possibility. I honestly don't know who to favor in this, but I feel like no matter what, like, we've seen Roar, we've seen Rhea, both of them have played very well, but I feel like Roar and Void have been the better tank duo, at least on a consistent level. And I am going to favor the Gladiators in this series against the Spark, but I want to see the Spark unleash your DPS in this series, and this one could be a coin flip for me.
I give the edge to the Gladiators, too, just off the sheer fact that Hanjo has always, throughout the season, been a little slower to adapt to meta changes. And I don't know if they've had enough time to really suss out what they need to do. As you mentioned, the Gladiators are an adaptable team, and they're definitely one of the other teams that I don't think have a lot of pitfalls of getting stuck in a certain composition, whereas the Spark, I think, do, because after all of the crystal drama and all of that, we saw a lot of Adora, and Adora basically only played Mei. So we don't have a good idea of what else Adora can play at a good level. Now, he looked pretty decent on Mei during the second half of the stage 4, but during the first half, he was basically irrelevant. So Gushui's consistency is going to be a big thing here. Like, Gushui is going to have to, hold the team up while the rest of the team kind of catches up to him. And I would give the edge to Gushui over Roar in terms of the main tank battle, definitely. But I think Void propels that tank duo, like you were talking about. Surefour is actually a pretty good Doomfist too. I don't think he's as good as Hydration, but it's not like if they run Hydration on Sigma, they lose out on the Doomfist. Mm-hmm. Hydration's also a very good Pharah, whereas Surefour and Decay are okay Pharahs, but in terms of like historically, Hydration was the better Pharah. So we'll see what look we get out of the Gladiators, but they're definitely in that camp of highly adaptable. Like the only thing that could sink the Gladiators at this point is their strange inner turmoil team subs where we get like freaking their Panker will play as tank for the first time through the season, and that sinks them like we saw last year with iRemix and crazy stuff like that. Like, right. Gladiators are basically their own worst enemy because they have all the tools they need to succeed in this meta, whereas Hangzhou I am worried about because Gushui's best tank, Winston, is not very relevant except for, like I said, on certain points. We don't know what they'll do in terms of Sigma, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in anyone playing Sigma on Hangzhou outside of Gushui, just because he's shown he can play most tanks at pretty high level. Whereas Rhea's been okay, but he's been hit or miss here or there. And we've really only seen Diva out of Rhea. Like we saw a little bit of Roadhog, but even that was passable. So I'm more worried about Hangzhou, and just because of that, I'm gonna give it to the Gladiators. But who knows? Maybe like freaking Ria's a phenomenal Sigma. Like we don't know, so it's interesting. But I if I was putting money on this, I would bet on the adaptability of the Gladiators.
So moving on to our Friday matches, we have Spitfire opening up against the New York Excelsior. So another Korean battle to start the day. And so we know what London's going to bring at this point. We don't know what New York is going to do at this point. Obviously, their track record has not been spectacular in the playoffs. But if we are gonna see more consistency in regards to team comps with Farah and Doomfist, Flower definitely leveled up the prior week when we saw Jonak just causing him to go Super Saiyan with the Nano boost, and that was a really good showing for him. Granted, not too much on the line, but that was a wacky series to begin with. But, Flower is one of those guys who, everyone hypes him up, and, he has moments of greatness, and then there's other times when he just kind of whimpers. And we don't know what it's going to be. But when you're New York, when you had that stigma of always going out first, I would prefer them to, like, go big or go home in that case. Like, I would want to see Flower coming in for the playoffs in this case. But, with the rise of McCree and Farah and Doomfist, I honestly don't know who's going to start. Obviously, Libero has been kind of like their DPS player that hasn't really been subbed out all that much, but you have SBB, who is the heart and soul of the team. So I don't know if they're going to favor bringing him in as a flex DPS and then pairing him with Flower, if they're going to go Libero Flower. It's just so hard to get a read on this team, but I'm expecting Mono to come out, being a Sigma here, to match Gesture. And, the tank battle here should be pretty close. But I have to say, across the board, Fury, to me, out of the Orisa players that we saw in this past week, was actually one of the best ones, even though that's not his primary role, which is so crazy to think about. So despite having that swap up, there weren't too many shortcomings when it comes to the halt combinations that we have seen. But I will say, across the board, the Gravitic Flux has been kind of all over the place. We've not seen, perfected combos consistently. We've seen a couple of times, someone trying to save themselves from falling off of a map and using their ult. But when we have the global increase of ultimates by 12% in this patch that is played in the playoffs, so much is going to boil down to the ult economy. And, London, they've been pretty good with it. New York at times can be pretty flash in the pan, or they could overuse what they have at their wheelhouse, and that could definitely come into play in this series. And, I know we harp on New York based off of past failures, but, this is a meta that they could do better in, but I still expect the Spitfire to come out on top. But I would say this one's probably going to go, 4-2 in favor of London.
I could definitely see NYXL doing well in this meta. They have, like London, they have a lot of that they need to do really well. Mono has always been a strong point. I think Meko, regardless of what he plays, could actually see, like you say, a level up based on, maybe a little bit of a role switch, or maybe going to the Sigma, depending on how they go. Libero is a decent Doomfist. He also has Farah in his wheelhouse. But there is the unknown factor of the big boss, which is arguably, used to be one of the best McCree players in the game. So, for maps that they really want to push London, maybe control maps, which
Ilios.
is what, Ilios, like what we saw Pine come in last season on, we could see Pine make an appearance. as much of a meme as that is, it's highly possible with this meta. Um, that being said, London's keys to victory are basically just keep doing what you're doing. They don't have to do anything special. NYXL do have a little bit of footage on them. They have the one game, even though it was a super super long game. It's still only one game,
It's still a
and
lot of tape.
still a lot of tape. But when you break it down, like London was basically playing against one comp that whole match. So as long as they break that down and run other comps, NYXL also have the advantage of Jonak is a phenomenal Ana player. So if they want to switch to more Ana, which we've seen here and there, a lot of teams are opting to the Moira out of the Ana just because of the fact that Coalescence is stronger against the double barrier. But Ana still does a lot of work for certain comps because it controls the skies. This could be an interesting match. I still give it to London. The only thing I would say is if Birdring actively throws maps some more, NYXL will take advantage of that. Like they're definitely the team that can lose games very easily, but if you're giving them an advantage, they're rarely gonna not take advantage of that. So I think this will be good. I think 4-2 is a good prediction. I'd even say 4-3, just because of the amount of control maps that we have to play. This is going to be a good match, and this is one that I could see dictating a lot of the flow of the playoff season, because you got to remember that it's double elimination. So whoever loses these matches, we're not cutting them loose. We will see them play again, and these teams in double elimination, and I didn't stress this earlier, so I want to do it now. The teams that adapt in the losers bracket generally go on to win, because the winners bracket usually has it pretty easy, so they generally get stuck in their ways. So it doesn't happen all the time, but losers bracket, if they take those lessons and learn it, they could change things up enough to win it. So this is very interesting to me.
So let's say, like, I don't know, I don't have your bracket in front of me, but out of the teams that you have getting dropped to the lower bracket, out of the four, who do you think would have the best shot at making a run and winning the grand finals?
Honestly, whoever loses the rain shock game.
Yeah.
I can't, and we're going to talk about that one in a second, but I can't pick a winner for that one, because I think whoever loses could easily come back and win it right now. And like we've prefaced it earlier, we don't know. Like maybe the Shock really suck at Sigma. Like maybe they'll drop 2 games in a row.
I mean, Choi did get gold, so
exactly. So or maybe the Rain are terrible at Sigma. Like we don't know. So there's a big question mark. But my prediction would be whoever loses the Rain Shock game and goes to the loser bracket probably has the best chance. Out of that, maybe Seoul, because they looked really well. But I feel like NYXL, if they drop against London, they're probably done. Like unless there's like it goes all maps and they lose by like 1%, maybe there'll be a different case. But yeah, I would say our next game, Rain Shock, is whoever wins that probably has the best chance of winning it, but whoever loses it isn't quite out of it.
So looking at the Atlanta Rain San Francisco Shock game, like I'll be honest, like we've seen the Shock really be the elite team throughout the year. I know Titans are definitely in discussion there, but Shock have always been the team this year that have kind of adapted to the meta shifts in their own way. A lot of it initially, it was incorporating like Baptiste, getting played by Rascal. They really at the forefront of that. They had their own answer to like the DPS meta as well, and we've really started to see this team incorporate all of the pieces on this roster. So it's kind of like got it to this point now where it's like, okay, like are they going to move forward with Smurf? Are we going to see Super back into the mix? What's happening with Sinatra? Then you have to think about, well, like, we've seen Stryker come in at times. We've seen Architect come in at times. But Rascal has been playing a lot. Like, we've just seen so many different looks at this point. It's hard to pinpoint what direction this team is going to take. But regardless of who's in, they don't really have, like, this different level when it comes to the substitutions in regards to how the teams have performed. Because even when they put in their B squad, they still are competing against the best teams and making it a series. And you have Atlanta, who have really embraced like this mantra of the underdog. They made a huge run in stage 4. They took some extra time in order to prepare for the playoffs after having a very easy end of the stage where they went 2-0, only dropping a map against, Dallas Fuel and Boston Uprising. So, I can't think of a better situation for the Reign to be in, having an extra prep time, but knowing you have to face the Shock, that is not an easy match to start. But, they're happy to be there, but, I'm with you when it comes to, like, the lower bracket. Either one of these teams, regardless of who wins, like, I would probably favor them over London. But I want to see what Atlanta's going to do. Like, are they going to have success with the Symmetra? I don't think that's going to be the case, so, like, what's plan B going to be for this team? And that's really the biggest question mark that I have. Like, I'm not too concerned about how their tank line or how their support line is going to do, because we've seen a level of consistency throughout the year. Dogman may feed, but, we... But who knows? Maybe Moth might end up doing the same. We don't know. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about the most probable teams to win, everyone is looking at the Titans, they're looking at the Shock, and then the Reign have been the other team in the discussion. So this is just one of those situations where I don't know who's going to come out on top. I would favor the Shock just based off of the level of play throughout the year. But can the Shock continue to set their own way of doing things and adapt into the metas and having it work out in their favor every time? You would think at some point their luck is going to run out. But at the end of the day, it's double elimination, and they have the best coaching staff in the league. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, so... This game, if there was any game this week that I really sat and broke down, it would be this one. I definitely did some digging for some of the other ones, but this one, I don't know. Like, I go back and forth on it. Like every time I talk about it, like even right now, I'm reading my notes on it, and I'm like, well, not really, kind of maybe. So like like you said, both of these teams are hyper flexible. Like I think that's a plus for both of these teams. Like Reign's DPS lineup can play pretty much anything they want in this meta. Like Baby Bay, Urster, and Enlir have a full gamut of heroes that they can run, and most of them have some overlap. So you can switch them around. The Shocker in just the same case. I mean, you got Architect, you got Rascal, you got Sinatra. Honestly, out of everybody, I probably think Sinatra would get the least amount of play. But his Doomfist is pretty good too, so we may see Sinatra come back on Doomfist. So DPS wise, I would put them pretty even. The tank lineup is where I start to see some things that lean a little more to Shock, because Shock have Choi Hoban, who is ridiculously good for a gold player, and then we have Super, who is good on Rhine and looks decent on Sigma from what I've seen on his stream, and we have Smurf, who seems to just play whatever tank they really need at the moment. So there's not a world where I see Smurf and Choi Hoban play together in terms of this coming meta, whereas super is map dependent, kind of like what we saw in stage 4. Whereas the Rain, like Pokebo and FRD have looked better. They definitely looked really good during stage 4. But I don't know about Pokebo's ability to flex, because it seems like Pokebo is decent at Rhine, and he was pretty good at Orisa. So I don't know if he's able to flex to the Sigma, and FRD really has only ever played Diva. Like, we got to see some Roadhog during stage 4, and that was good, but that's more so dependent on your Orisa than your Roadhog play. Like, he didn't have anything egregious, but he wasn't like solo carrying us as Roadhog, as we've seen some pro players do in certain points. So that's where I get hung up. And Daco is not even in the discussion for me. I don't think we'll see him come back unless something really crazy. It just seems like Pokebo and FRD have the synergy now that they're going to try to make those two work. My guess would probably be put Pokebo on the Sigma and put FRD on Orisa, just because I think Orisa's the easier player to play. So that would be my pick. And then in terms of like support lineup, I think both support lineups are really good. Like, obviously Dogman is hyper aggressive, which is not a bad thing in this meta. Like, if your support can create enough space without dying, that's the key, without dying. It can be a huge advantage to your team. And we did see teams run a little bit of Baptiste, so there are certain points where we could see Rascal come in and play support. The problem with that is, and I actually think that's the one pitfall for the Shock, is I unless there is like a very specific game plan they have in mind, I don't think that they should do that, because if the Baptiste doesn't work, Rascal's other support, I don't think it's quite at that level. So they could get caught out and lose it, lose that very easily. So I think this is a very good game. And, I said it earlier, I'll say it again. I think either one of these teams can win the season. And I don't think it's entirely dependent on who wins this match, because I think, like you said, both of these teams are highly coached. Shock, like you said, have the best coaching staff in the league. I'd argue Rain may have the second best coaching staff in the league, if not the best. So you can make a point for both of them. And I think regardless of who wins or loses, they're going to take every match and they're going to take the lessons from that match and move forward. So, I talked about it earlier. I think the teams that avoid the most pitfalls, like, they avoid the getting stuck in one composition. They avoid, running what they perceive as the meta. They avoid, thinking that, what we saw before is going to work, that kind of stuff. As long as they stay loose and stay open-minded, I think the team that can do that will have the best chance, because, everything is in flux. So as long as you can adapt, I think that team is going to be the team that wins at the end. So as much as I'd like to say, boy, these first 4 matches are really important, they're really not. Like, they will give us a good idea, but these first 4 matches are like a warm up. They're like a teaser. So, like, if the play-ins were the appetizer, this is like the hors d'oeuvres before the main course after the appetizer. Like, it's a very weird situation, and I just figured out how to make that better, but I'm not going to repeat it. So this is going to be a wild weekend. Like, I would highly advise everybody, if you have the All Access Pass, go watch the Sigma point of view, because it's very telling of how teams do. But more so, I would highly advise watching the Pharah battle, because there's going to be a lot of good Pharah battles this weekend, and I am really, really interested to see if the theory of whoever has the better Pharah and whoever's Pharah positions more aggressively, or at least gets to position more aggressively, wins the match. So this is going to be a fun weekend, and that's not even all the games this weekend. Like, obviously we have more games based on who wins these and who loses. So we could speculate, but I don't even think that's gonna do us any good.
No.
Like because there's so much variables. Like it'd be different if like we were still in goats, we could kind of break it down, or even if we were in stage 4 meta, we could still break it down. But this is fun. Like this is exciting for the playoffs. As pissed off as I thought I would be about the whole competitive integrity and crap like that, I am super excited for the playoffs. Like watching over this past weekend, I caught all of the games live except for the end of the Soul game, which I had to go back and watch. And like I was on the edge of my seat like the whole time. So every time a substitution came in, every time a team would try something different, every time a team wouldn't try something different, I was like, oh yeah, they screwed up. So like I am pumped for playoffs. Like this, last week we did our show on Thursday, so I got to be all excited going into the next day. Whereas, like I said, I was off today, so tomorrow,
3 days.
yeah, tomorrow I'm gonna be doubly disappointed. I'm gonna be like, cool, I have to wait for Overwatch, and I have to go back to work.
So the best way I could describe this week is, let's say you're in a moving car and you're trying to leave the car. The first week is you jumping out and trying to run as soon as you hit the ground. Sometimes it might work, probably not, depends how fast you're going. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people stumbling. Second week is when you roll. Much better looking the second time. And then it'll just look progressively better as we get deeper into the playoffs. So, rather than diving into the unknown matches, what we'll do is, we'll update our brackets, we'll post them on our Discord, or even like post them on our Twitter feed. And then, next week, obviously, we'll reflect on the week that was. Probably not all of the games, just because, there's 8 this week, and there's going to be a lot next week as well. But we'll definitely hit the major points, and we'll see what sort of iterations in regards to meta shifts we are going to see, or if we're going to see more of the same with the Pharah Doomfist being the primary. But it should be a good week of games. We're finally in the playoffs, and we got some pretty hype matches, so hopefully everyone will be able to tune in. And if you can't, be sure to check out the VODs and, look back at all of the crazy Sigma flank plays that we have seen, where there have been quite a few. But with that said, guys, we should close it out because we are nearing 2 hours tonight. So with that being said, if you guys want to help us out, the best thing to do is, of course, to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice. iTunes is always the go-to, that's the primary one, so any sort of feedback or constructive criticism is always welcomed, because that will offer us insight on how we can improve the show. If you would like to find additional Overwatch-related content, we do have Overwatch Recall, that is our podcast directory. I do not have the weekly recall done yet. I'll probably do that. I don't know if I'll do it today or if I'll do it tomorrow. It'll be out soon, though. But usually that's posted Sunday and Monday, where we have the prior week's episodes all in one spot. So you can find it on our website or on Twitter at OW Recall. So if you would like to support our show, we do have a couple of different options. It is September, and I know Twitch is running their, half-off subs for the month. I don't know if that's started yet or if that's starting next week. It should be pretty soon, though. So, any sort of, Twitch Prime subs are greatly appreciated. You can also sub via cash. And then we do have our Patreon at patreon.com/OWL Network. So there we have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So you too could join the likes of our master and above patrons, Blazing Bob, Brandon, Josabal, or Jay-Z, as Ed and R likes to call him, Owl, and Kesha in helping our network grow. So I want to thank you guys all again for the continued support throughout these months. But Spider, why don't you go ahead and let our listeners know how they can get a hold of us?
Sure. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. You can check out our website where we post all the shows plus articles, www.owlnshow.com. Twitter @OWLNShow. You can check out our YouTube, youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. Like I said, we have the Sigma deep dive video coming up later this week. Be sure to hit subscribe so you know when that goes live. You can come chat with us on Discord at discord.me/OWLN show. You can. Okay, so
September
starts tomorrow. There you go. So that's perfect. That's a perfect segue. So if you're listening to the audio, you can catch us on Twitch, twitch.tv/OWLN show. September starts tomorrow, so we are a Twitch affiliate, so it is a way to help support the show. You can watch our various shows throughout the week. This show airs Monday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, and it is Overwatch League Network. Tuesday nights is our Fantasy Overwatch League show, which is Owl by the Numbers. That is 6 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays is the Variety Overwatch show, Heroes Never Die, with Totem and Edinar going off topic. That is 5 p.m. Pacific. And then we have various host streams throughout the week. I typically take Thursdays. This Thursday, depending on what the Overwatch schedule is, it may actually be World of Warcraft. But be sure to hit the follow button if you can't subscribe to know when we go live. One more time, you can check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/OWL Network. You can find me on Twitter at SpiderGD. I helped design a flag for Jane. He had a Plat Chat flag that he roughly did in paint. So if you'd like to see my take on that, you can follow me at SpiderGD on Twitter. What about you, Totem? Where could they find you?
I'm over on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR. And of course, guys, post your brackets. We'll relink the bracket generator on our Discord. So I'm curious to see how everyone thinks the playoffs are going to shake up. But with that being said, you have been listening to Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 95. I've been your host, Tumblery Drunk, joined as always by my co-host Spider, and we hope to see you guys for our next show. Take care and have a good night.